In this episode of our photography review show, we're going to be looking at landscape, mixed team, macro, and wildlife photographers. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I hope you had a great week, and I hope you're ready for more photography reviews. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub, and I'm a founder and creator here at Clever Photographer. Now, for the last 6 or 7 months, I've been reviewing your photos on this channel, and I reviewed thousands of photos from hundreds of photographers. Now, it's very popular, and if you want to join us already for the next episode, all you need to do is to join our membership. The membership is called Clever Photographer Plus, and for a little fee, we give you every month a brand new bundle of tools, including presets, textures, overlays, LUT, brushes, everything you can imagine when it comes to digital tools for photographers. If you want to find out more about it and join us for next week's episode of Photography Review Show, just head to our website, cleverphotographer.com/membership. And now it's time to start with the reviews. So we are once again in Lightroom CC, and we're going to be starting with landscape photographers. First of all, we have Bevlea here, so let's have a look at the images. So we have 2 images here, both of them very creative, very pretty. So let's have a look at the information on the camera. Now, between the 2, they are the same cameras, and it looks like the same lenses. So let's have a look at it. Starting with the technical part of the image, this was captured with the Olympus Mark II M1. The lens was 12 to 100 millimeters with the f4. Now, this image right here, the ISO is quite high on 1250. The lens, you were on 28 millimeters, and the f-stop was f14. Now the shutter speed on 1,600 of a second, and this is what we got. So now usually with that high ISO you get some noise into the image. So let's try to zoom into 100%, and that doesn't work for us. Maybe because it's a smaller image. 668 kilobytes. Now, if you send us images in the future, it's always better to send them with a little bit of a higher resolution and more quality, so that way we can judge it a little further. However, we can still zoom in and see, I mean, we get more pixels, but I'm assuming with that high ISO, maybe you got some noise anyway. Now, generally the idea of the ISO is that the goal should be to stay as close as to 100 as possible, because with 100 ISO, you're not going to introduce any additional color or grain noise into your image. When you go higher, you will introduce it to your images. Now, depending on your gear, some people can go as far as 1,200, 2,000, and they can fix it in post-processing. Some cameras, they can't, and then you really have to reshoot the images. So this is where I would stick closer to 100. 28 millimeters, perfectly fine, nice and wide. And with the f14, I'm wondering why the f14 in this case. I mean, I understand that maybe some of the elements are a little bit closer, but personally, I would probably stay somewhere around f11. The kind of golden ratio on most of the lenses, and this is where the lens is basically performing the best, giving you the best sharpness and the best picture. It's usually between f7.1 and f11. So really, as much as you can, unless it's intentional, so there is some stuff which you just can't get in a camera, you're going for a long exposure, or you want a really big depth, I would stick in this range, f7.1, f11. Then the shutter speed, 1,600 of a second, really depends on the situation. I'm not sure if you haven't done some sky replacement here or what you done. However, obviously, depending on the values on the camera, 1,600 of a second is what it is. There is nothing really moving on the picture, so I don't know if you would have to go as fast. And if you could have lowered the speed on your shutter speed, maybe you could have lowered the ISO as well. So this is just some stuff from it. To be honest, the image looks quite sharp. There is not really like a motion blur or anything. That looks good. The light is a little bit stronger, but nothing crazy. There are some shadows, but they are not really distracting. So I think that works quite well. Although some highlights are a little bit stronger, but I think that's quite well done. So technically, I would be more looking at these values and seeing how I could be able to lower the ISO by maybe slowing the shutter speed and so on. Moving to the next image, looking at it, it's pretty much the same setting except the your lens millimeters change and your f-stop change. So once again, we are looking at this image and it probably is the same area. Maybe it's the same road I'm looking at on this one, just from a different angle. So this again, ISO 1250, 14 millimeters lens. So this time really wide, and then f18, 1/1000th of a second on a shutter speed. So I would just repeat myself really. You need to keep an eye on the ISO. Of course, I think looking at some of the details specifically here, there was definitely some sky replacement done here. It looks quite nice. I mean, you know, it's not as visible. There's few points here and there, but I think with the kind of night sky and the road, I think it's quite nice. So again, the sharpness is quite all right. The light is decent. There are no shadows, so it's more kind of natural with the combination with the sky. Altogether, I think quite nicely done. Which brings us to composition. Now we have two different images, and traditionally I would have to say I prefer this one. There is a really strong composition element with the flow and a leading line. Obviously that really helps. It gives us sense of depth, gives us sense of direction. It also points us towards the brighter part of the image. The road itself is quite bright, and knowing the rule that human eyes are automatically attracted by the brightest and whitest part of the image, this is where you just need to keep an eye on it so it doesn't completely overtake all of the attention, but I think it's quite nicely done here. Other than that, it's good. It's just shame that you had to crop away this part. I always like when there are quite dominant elements like this electricity pole or these trees like this one, big one. I wish there would actually be the tree completely in the frame or just taken away. But because the road is already quite off the center, I would probably prefer if there would be a little bit of space on a side here. Coming to this image and talking about composition, you're talking about focal point, you're talking about the main subject, which is this post. However, as there is so many other items and elements like these trees, which have the same color, same shape, same length, it's actually quite difficult to recognize it as your main subject. So obviously you have it in the center, which kind of make you think, okay, that's what it's about. But then the eyes go all over the image simply because it's the same texture, again, same color. So this is where maybe it's not the strongest composition. The road is cut off a little bit, and really it's just away anyway. And also what happening, again, coming back to the brightness and that being attracted to the viewer, this would be the first place the people would be looking at, and then maybe they would come back here. So just between the two, I think this one is a stronger composition. When it comes to post-processing, obviously both of them are quite stylized looks. This is the kind of warm, very kind of ginger, yellow, orange, red tones. Almost you almost removed all the blues, which can work very well. It looks almost like your Western movie. So I think that works very nicely. I think it's very well done. I quite like how there is the texture in the sky, which kind of makes it all nice and moody. The combination and the workaround with the shadows, I think works very well. So I think overall you've done very good job here. I think the idea is really, really lovely. So well done for that. And all in all, very well done. On this one, again, compared to the first one, I like it a little bit more. And the reason why I like it when it comes to post-processing here is the combination of the warm and cool colors. It just gives a little bit more contrast, and that really helps to the viewer. So already we're talking about the opposite side of your color wheel. We have other blues and orange or reds. They work really nicely together. They naturally bring depth on the image. Then we have the path. Everything just really works here. A little bit of the green make it just a little bit more natural as well. So between the two, the first one is really kind of stylized image, where this one I think is just a little bit closer to the natural look. All in all, thank you very much for sending us your images. It was a pleasure for me to look at them. And if you have more, please send them over. Which brings us to Laurie. Laurie, we have two images from you this week. Now we have this one, which seems to be quite similar to something what I saw last week. Let's have a look at the last week images. Laurie, what we were looking at. Probably same area, but maybe just a different view. Well, anyway, let's jump into it. Let's have a look at the camera details, starting with this one, which I love. I think that's a brilliant capture. Love the silhouette, love the sky, the texture in the sky, the colors, beautiful. Really like this one. So let's talk about it. We have a Canon 5D Mark III with the 70 to 300 millimeters. And now looking at the settings, ISO 6400, 300 millimeters, so really punched in f5.6, 1/250th of a second. Now, I'm sure, Laurie, you've been sending pictures to me so long, and I'm sure you know what I'm gonna say, and it's the high ISO. How we could have avoided that? Most likely in this light condition, only with a tripod, and if it was really dark, also with the remote control. I think that would be one way of doing it. Now, the high ISO, is it visible? Yes, that's way too much, 100%, or maybe just like this. When you look at the sky, that's where you can see it a lot. Obviously, on this size of the image, it's just 300 kilobytes. It almost looks like a pixelation, but it's a little bit visible, which I think is just a little bit of shame. On this compression, how it's done, you can also see some color noise in the actual mountain, which I think is a little bit of a shame. But it would be quite interesting to see this image in a full resolution, because I think some of this stuff would actually disappear. So I think that would probably help. 300 millimeters is perfectly fine. f5.6 in this situation, you probably ideally would go as low as the lens goes. So that's what you did. 1/250th of a second is, I'm thinking with the camera, you should be able to go as far as 1/50th, 1/60th of a second. And I wonder if by going even a little bit slower, if it would have allowed you to maybe lower the ISO just a little bit, you know, the kind of following the triangle. You couldn't have gone lower with the f-stop. So the next thing you need to do is to start to slow down the camera shutter speed. And I think you could have gone a little lower even if you haven't had a tripod. So that would be my tip for the next time. Otherwise, when I look at it like this, I love it. Like, it's a print, you could totally print, put it in your wall, and I think it would look great. Which brings us to this one, and this is kind of similar to what we were looking last week, or probably similar location. So let's have a look at it again. Canon 5D Mark IV with the lens 70 to 300, and from this setting here, look at that, ISO 100, the golden goal for the ISO 70 millimeters, f7.1, 1/200th of a second. So obviously different light conditions, much easier to stick with the 100 here, 70 millimeters, so quite nice crop, probably kept everything nice and natural. f7.1, again, perfect, and 1/200th of a second. Yeah, just whatever the camera needed for that situation is perfect. Obviously we have a lovely sharpness. I'm not sure if the sky was there like this or no, because I can see parts of the fence here kind of missing, but it still look quite nicely. I think it matched together. I think I would make the sky a little bit bluer, because it's kind of looking like faded out, where the rest of the image is quite crisp and sharp, but that's about it. And I would keep an eye on these little elements, seeing if I can maybe remove them in Photoshop, or even in Luminar, whatever you would prefer. Or you could even use the healing brush here and see if you could maybe fix that. Let's have a look at it. Let's see if we could actually remove part. If we would use the healing brush, but on much smaller side, and let's say we would actually paint over this one line here, it does go away. So you could have even do it in Lightroom. So I wonder if this one as well. Yeah, it helps a little bit. So something maybe to try and see. Bringing us back to your camera setting, I already stepped away. Same camera, same lens, if I'm right. Yep. Higher quality as well of the image, which is great. I think that really helps. And the camera setting was spot on. Now talking about composition, what I really like here is the color and luminance or brightness contrast. I think that works very well. The texture really works well here as well. Obviously, as always, you know, I'm a big fan of more diffused light. I think that would help. Although the shadows are not as strong here, I think that is quite a good thing. Maybe the sun was so strong that they were not even that dark. So that's about it. Now, the only thing is I'm just just like last week, I'm just trying to figure out what is it I'm looking at, what is the main subject. And I think I asked you last week already, and I don't know, I haven't seen if you have actually told us what is it we're looking at. However, as a kind of abstract view with the textures, colors, contrast, I think it works very well. It's just, what is it we exactly looking at? One more thing, composition wise, which would maybe help, would be to actually place there something, and that could be human, any element if you could find, which would help us to understand the size. Again, when you look at it, that can be this big, or it can be meters and meters tall. So it really depends. If there was anything, include tree or anything to just give the viewer a little bit of sense of size and scale, I think that would be helpful. Now on this one, when it comes to composition, I have nothing to add. I think it's great. It's a balanced composition, so each side is really nicely leveled, the contrast is great, the colors are great, the texture in the sky is great. So all in all, as a composition goes, I think it's great. Now when it comes to post-processing, again with this image, nothing to add. I love how there is the brighter area in the center, darker areas on the top. I love the mountains, how they are really silhouette like, so they are really dark. I think you either go for one or the other. Either you have enough details so you can bring some details up and it's more recognizable, or you go for the dark. I think the between doesn't look professional, and this looks great. This is how it should be. So I don't have much to add on this one. On this one, not much to add. Of course, just kind of looking at it on my screen, I always wonder if the white balance is right, but as you can see, you pretty near to what it should be. It's just I'm seeing some kind of blues maybe in the highlights of the image, but that's fine. I wonder if we could just warm it up a little and maybe add a little bit of tint. I would maybe, if we're talking about texture and that's what you're capturing, I would probably push a little bit of some of the sliders like texture to kind of increase that a little bit, or clarity. Now also for image like this, maybe it would be smarter to actually add it locally. So we could do the opposite. We could bring the clarity to minus and texture as well. So that makes a nice glow. And then we take our brush, in a masking tool, and we actually brush the texture with some clarity and maybe a touch of contrast into the image. So I think that's what I would probably do rather than applying it to the entire image. Just to the areas you really want to highlight. So something like this. Let's see, before and after. Maybe a little extra contrast and a little more clarity. Again, before and after. And I think that helps. If the picture is about the texture, let's help it. Anyway, Laurie, thank you very much for sending us your images. Again, as always, pleasure to review them. And I can't already wait to see more of them in the future. Which brings us to Sunday. Sunday, we have 2 images from you today. Now I named it macro photography, but it's a flower captures and they are beautiful. So let's have a look at them. So I'm assuming those are tulips. Maybe I'm not the most flowery person. Let's talk about the technical part of the capturing. So you have a Sony, is it A1, I think, but lens 90mm macro f2.8, so brilliant. And from your camera settings, so this one is ISO 200, 90mm f14, 1/200 of a second. So let's have a look at it now. This is, first of all, the details, even just in the drops, are beautiful. Then the sharpness is also quite nice. And what I really like is that the camera is able to keep the main subject, which is this flower right here, all in focus, and then just very gradually blur the background until you get to the point when it's kind of really soft. I think that looks really, really nice. The camera setting is quite right. I wonder if you use the tripod on this one. You wouldn't have to with 1/200 of the second, but the light is also really lovely, very nice and diffused. Once again, the detail on the drops looks really, really nice, and the sharpness is beautiful. Just really love it. Very, very nice. Which brings us to this one. Compared to this one, I like this one, I think, because it's a little bit more dramatic. The darker areas, the brighter areas, the combination of the color. I think this one is a little bit more flat, but it's still very, very pretty. Once again, same camera, same lens with the ISO 200, 90mm lens, f f16 1/200 of a second. Once again, the main flower all in focus, which is quite incredible that it, you know, all the way. Quite often these macro lenses give you this crazy blur where you can't see anything. I think this just looks really nice, and it's lovely to see. So excellent capture, well said. Light is good again, and some of the drops there again, very well done. Which brings us to composition, and I think similarly to this one, when you pick a subject which is all in focus, I think unless you crop it a little bit more, I think it's a shame that you're missing part of it. I think that is just quite often people will understand it as a mistake because they will think that you just crop it away. You know, when you're taking a picture, you just were not able to think about capturing the whole flower. That would be my only thing here. I think it works quite nicely. It's well positioned for the kind of thirds. It gives us nice depth. The contrast is nicely done. So as you went a little bit higher, the flower is actually on a green background, which I think works really nicely with the color contrast. So I don't think there's that much wrong with it. I just wish there was the rest of the flower here. Other than that, again, the color contrast works great. The depth is lovely here. So all in all, very well done. Where on this one, obviously, we have the main subject all in a picture, almost centered, with the drops having great details in them. The combination of the brightness contrast, the luminance contrast works really well here. The color contrast works really well here. I think it's just very well done. I love this capture. And few of the pictures together as maybe like a 3 frames printed would look brilliant because those are full colors, looking very natural. And this could be definitely on a cover of a magazine because it has a great shape. You could completely have a name of the magazine here. So well done. Love it. Post-processing. Nothing to add on this one. I think it's spot on, natural but powerful, and just very well done. On this one, I wonder if we could actually got a similar look into this one. And I mean, you could go into the curves and really start to push it around. I wonder if we could just place one here and then see if maybe we close the background a little bit and then even more this way. So making little S curve. Then of course we can make very strategically positioned vignette by using the gradient here and just inverting it and then go in a minus. So we make the background a little bit darker and then we can duplicate this. But actually we're going to create a new one. We're not going to duplicate. We're going to create new mask again, radial gradient, and we're just going to position it on the flower and make it just a touch brighter. So I would do something like this. Then we can go back to our general settings, push the contrast just a little bit. In the color, nothing. That's not what I wanted. What I wanted was the effects. And I would actually go down with the clarity to add a little bit of glow all around it. We can push some texture back if we want to. And one more thing we could do, we could add a little bit of fade to it. So we would have to go back to the light and into our curve. And what we could do is put one point here and just bring this up a little. So obviously we are looking into the shadows. We make them fade away a little bit. And this is where I would leave it. So let's see before and after. And I think it's just a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more focused on the main subject. All in all, still lovely. So this is what I would do with this image. Both of them really nice. I wonder if you just bow this lens, either way, it that's beautiful results and lovely pictures. Which brings us to Blake Winston and 2 of his mixed photography pictures. So let's have a look at it. What do we have here, Blake? This image right here and the snake right here. Now, starting with this one. Canon PowerShot S5. That's a camera I never heard about before. With the camera setting ISO 80, 21.9 millimeters, f4 1/200 of a second. Now the camera setting is quite fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Maybe the f4 for situation like this, when you want more of the picture being in focus, I would probably try to go for something like f7. The rest of it is fine. ISO 80 is ideal. So it's all good there. The sharpness, I'm assuming it's about this kind of machine falling into the ground and then with the fog around, which I would suggest that it was added in post-processing. So it's creating this kind of very dramatic scene. I think technically quite nicely done. The light is diffused. I would leave it there. Bringing us to this one. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of snakes. However, looking at it, this was Apple iPhone. So when it comes to the settings on a mobile phone, it's a little bit different than on your camera because they just perform a little bit differently. The setting is ISO 32, 4.2 millimeters, f1.6, 1/160th. Now, I think the biggest thing is that it either look like you zoomed in optically with your camera or you really crop the image because we're getting really high pixelation here. Even though it's 8.7 megabytes and it's a large picture, you see lots of pixelation here. The details are starting to disappear. You get a lot of color noise in it. So I think this image would need it to be retaken and just get closer to the animal. So good idea. However, the result is really pixelated. And if you would print this, it would be really visible. Bringing us back to the composition. Now, the composition is very interesting. I think, especially in today's date and age, these kind of pictures are quite popular, showing how the nature can get damaged. So I think that works quite nicely. I think the fog or smoke actually is a good idea. I think it adds a little bit more drama to it. And the main subject is there. The main message is clear. So I think that works quite nicely. Now we can do some additional improvements to it in post-processing, but I think as a picture, thought, and a composition goes, Blake, I think this is well done. Now, as a composition goes, this is actually very nicely done. You get the kind of depth with the snake actually coming in and then the head poking behind the tree, helping us with the depth, the main subject. I think everything works here. This is the image where I would be more looking at how I can improve the quality of the actual capture. So technically how I could improve it. So this is about it. Now, post-processing, we're not going to do anything to this because it's just, once it's this highly pixelated, you can't do much changes to it. However, on this one, I would go into edit and I would definitely remove some more saturation here. So we can do that by removing saturation, making it almost black and white. We don't want it completely black and white, but making it more, I think, would help. I think I would have heavy vignette, closing it up, really focusing on the center. Now I would also add some clarity and texture because you want to really make it kind of punchy with lots of details. That's what it's all about. It's really grungy and lots of texture in. So that's what I would do here. And maybe going into light and the curve here. Let's see if we would make it all a little bit darker. So just a very simple S curve would probably help as well. Now push the contrast just a little bit and leave it there. Before, after, just a little stronger impact. And this is how I would edit it. Blake, thank you very much for sending us your photos. It was a pleasure to review them. And if you have more, make sure you send them over. Which brings us to Evgeniy. Evgeniy, we have 2 images from you. So starting with the squirrel here, let's jump to it. Let's have a look at the camera details. Again, Pentax K100D. And looking at the camera settings, ISO 400, 300 millimeters, f5.6, 1/350th of a second. Now with ISO 400, how are you doing with the noise? Quite well. There is just maybe a little bit, obviously maybe some post-processing done to it. Now you lost a little bit of the details on the animal. I think there is a lots of focus on the nose and the hands. And then after, as you can see on the fur itself, it's starting to kind of disappear. So I think that's maybe caused by the higher ISO. However, 300 millimeters obviously really punched in, and 5.6 giving you a really lovely depth, and 1/350th of a second, making sure that the animal is nice, sharp, and focused. So well done for that one. Moving on the second image and talking about same camera, ISO 200, 260 millimeters, f8, and 1/750th of a second on the shutter speed. So this is where the ISO is fine, 260 millimeters, so really zoomed in. F8 still giving you some nice details at the back, so it's more recognizable. I think that works very well. 1/750th of a second works as well, so the details and sharpness is all the way through. What I would be looking at, Evgeniy, is to see how you can get better lighting. I think soft light would be really helpful. Sometimes it's just a question of having a big sheet of white paper and somehow with somebody, sometimes you can even do it by yourself, holding it in a way that it actually covers the flower. So you can't see it on the camera, but it's above, and it creates nice shape of kind of diffused light. I think that would be really helpful, and kind of thinking about your images of these type of images, I think that would really improve, because suddenly you would get much more natural and full colors. The sharpness would be better. The camera would know better what to do. The highlights would be a little bit more balanced with your shadows, and it would just work all together a little bit better. So that would be my suggestion for that. When it comes to composition, I think this is great. I would maybe center the flower a little bit further. Since we're talking about square, I would probably go somewhere around here and really balance the sides to make sure that it's kind of in the center of the frame. That's what I would do on this one. The butterfly is beautiful. The level of the details is beautiful. The flower really standing out from the background, adding some additional depth, just altogether great. Now this one is probably one of my most favorite squirrel image I saw from you. I think it works really well because you get this natural frame. You have this animal in full facing towards the photographer but looking a little bit away. Lots of details, lovely depth with the green at the back. Just the combination together is beautiful, and I really like this one. The colors, everything works really well. Which brings us to post-processing. First I would double check the white balance on this one, and I would definitely not cool it, but I would probably add a little bit of the magenta or pink as they suggest here, or purple. I think that helps just a little bit to remove some of the blue tones here. So definitely not, I think more like this, because you want to remove some of the blue shades which are coming from the other side, from the cooler part, and maybe just push a little bit the pink to remove some of the greens. Other than that, as always, what would maybe help here would be to use the radial gradient, place it right here, and do the invert and minus exposure, and just add a little bit more natural vintage vignette to it. Brush to some details, and leave it from there. Evgeniy, lovely. On this one, what could we do? Going into edit, going into our curve, making one point in the middle, and then play around with making the background a little bit darker, and see with the highlights. Yeah, maybe something like this. I wonder if we could also add a little bit of fade here. I didn't want to add this one. Something like this maybe would help as well. Then going into our color, again, double checking the white balance. Color mixer, white balance, auto. Yep, definitely more pink. Look at the before and after. Maybe not that much, but something like this. Extra warmth would help as well, I think. And then going into the effects, minus clarity to add a little bit of glow, and then with a little bit of plus texture, recover some of the details. And that's it. Evgeniy, thank you so much for sending us your images. It was a pleasure to review them and to see them as always. Please make sure you send them more of your images in the future. So the next photographer we're going to be looking at is John Wilson. John, we have two images from you. So let's have a look at them. Starting with this one. Now that is very moody, dramatic picture from the forest. Let's have a look at the camera details. Starting with this one, it's a Canon 550D with the lens 400 millimeters, and from your camera settings, ISO 200, 400 millimeter, f5.6, 1/400 of a second. So I think as camera setting goes, it's quite good. Obviously, 400 millimeters lens for this type of picture. I wonder how big. This is where maybe the scale is missing, because I'm wondering, is this like this big or is it massive? That's one thing I would be looking at. f5.6 giving us this kind of soft blur, 1/400 of a second, making sure everything is nice and sharp. Now in overall the sharpness is quite good. We're getting some natural blur and depth at the back. There was a lot of post-processing done to it, but all in all it's very dramatic picture. So I think as a setting goes, it's nice. Now you're getting some really strong highlights, some really strong shadows, but we can have a look at that in post-processing. So now jumping into this one with this light burn, I think that looks really cool. Looking at your camera, is it the same camera? Let's have a look. Same camera. Lens, it doesn't really say. However, from your settings, ISO 100, 400 millimeters, f5.6, 1/400 of a second. So as the setting goes, spot on. The animal is super sharp. I love that. Obviously getting some nice softness at the back, creating really nice depth. The light is quite decent, a little bit on a brighter side, but then it works with this kind of light burn. So I think altogether, John, good idea. Which brings us to composition. I think that works nicely. It's a kind of more zoomed in crop image, which is not the problem. Obviously placing the animal like this works quite well, specifically on a portrait shape of an image. You can be much more experimental with the composition. I think when it's landscape, you kind of really have to put the elements in the right order, where on a portrait you get away with much more experimenting. And in this case it works because it fills up most of the picture. The head is on your third here, so when we go into cropping you can kind of see that. That works very nice. The body here as well. So very well thought, very good. The contrast of the colors quite nicely done, and the depth works all in favor of the composition here. Now this is more adventurous. As a composition goes, obviously this is kind of your main element. It's nicely placed there. The softness at the back, this is very kind of abstract capture, but I think it's quite nicely done, you know. Obviously the first thing when you would show this to somebody, his eyes immediately go to this part and then kind of go through the image ending at the back. So that's nicely done. What I'm not 100% sure here about are the colors. So that's bring us to post-processing. You get really kind of, it's when there's this really strong light green, almost heading towards the blue. They are in this part, and then you go towards yellow and greens, and it's just in these kind of patches. So that I think that's a little bit of a shame. I wish there would be either just this kind of color, like this kind of natural pastel green, or the color you see in the foreground here, but I think the combination makes it a little bit more unnatural. All in all, it's a good try. I like the contrast, I like the depth, I like the luminance. So I think all in all, very, very well done. I don't know what I would change. Maybe just play around with the contrast, trying to make this a little less brighter, and trying to open up the shadows to make them a little less darker. That would be my suggestion. Which brings us to this image. As a post-processing, I think the burn or light leak works very well here. I think the light is nicely done. The sharpness is nicely done. What it could get away is maybe doing some local adjustment, bringing more attention towards the bird itself. You could also close the image from the bottom with some more local adjustments using linear gradient, and doing something like this. You could kind of make it a little bit darker to add a little bit more contrast, and just leave it from there. I think it's really nicely done. Two little bit different images with lots of creativity in them, and I'm really always happy to see it, John. So thank you so much for sharing them with us. It was my pleasure to review them for you. Which brings us to Zdenek. Zdenek, we have 2 images. Bird. I haven't seen bird from you yet, I think. And this is some bird. Look at the beak. Very, very good. And then the landscape here, which is beautiful as well. Very well done. Okay, let's have a look at it. Let's jump into it, starting with the camera setting. So the landscape is Canon 600D video lens 18 to 55 millimeters. Now ISO 100, 18 millimeters f10, 1/250th of a second. So looking at it like this, obviously the sky with the details works very well here. 18 millimeters. Now personally, I used to shoot landscape like this with a wide lens as well, somewhere around 18 millimeters. But then I realized that, for example, the foreground element here used to get really big in comparison with the rest of the image, and then the parts like the lake and everything got much smaller. So I don't know exactly how you done this, but now how I would shoot this, I would probably stay above 24 if possible, or even higher, and I would shoot maybe like a portrait, 1, 2, 3, 4 images, and then put them together, because then I think the perspective and everything works a little bit better. That would be just my suggestion. You can shoot it like this as well, and it looks still very cool, but maybe by doing it my way, you would get little higher, little bigger lake, and maybe some of the mountains would look a little bit bigger. Other than that, I think it's quite cool. Now we were talking about the camera setting. The camera setting is spot on. The ISO 100 works really well. F10 is perfect, making sure everything is sharp. 1/250th of a second again works very well, making everything is kind of keeping its texture and color. Which brings us to the bird. Nikon Coolpix. Now the Coolpix, I need to find out more about this camera, because I've seen it with more and more people, and I actually spoke to somebody on a workshop I just run recently, and the lady was telling me that she also had a Coolpix and she absolutely loved it, especially for its like a zooming possibility. Apparently it was brilliant, so would love to know more about it. Now looking at your capture, ISO 800, which is more on the higher side, 170 millimeters, so nice zoom in, although I don't think you were that far from the bird really. F8, 1/800th of a second. Now the composition is nice, but talking about the technical part, there is just a touch of softness, or if it's not the softness, maybe I think the softness is coming from the higher ISO and maybe some noise removal. You can kind of see it on the feathers of the bird. That's a little bit visible. 170 millimeters is fine. F8 is good, giving us some nice soft background with enough details so you can recognize them. And 1/800th of a second, making sure that other than the blur from the noise, your image is quite nicely sharp. Which brings us to composition, and I think again coming to the photographer before, I was saying that when we capturing in portrait style, just like you did here, I think you can be a little bit more adventurous with the composition. I think the subject can be a little bit off center, and I think it works very well here. Of course, that as the bird facing towards this side, it's good that he has extra space here. It kind of works all nicely together. He's almost in line with your third here, which works very well. The composition is nice and balanced because you have same amount of space on the top and on the bottom. And all in all, with the depth and everything, I think it creates really nice composition. Which brings us to this image, which composition wise is actually again very nicely done. I like the amount of sky you kept in the image. Now, would I like a little bit more? If it would have been possible, yes. Just to get somewhere around the third would make it a little bit more balanced, I think. However, I also like the foreground here, even the few stones that really help with the depth. If they wouldn't be there, you would just lose completely the foreground elements of your photo. So I think that would be a little bit more helpful. The lake is great. Some of the shadows works very well. So all in all, as a composition goes, I still think it's very nicely done. So both of them well done on composition today. Now when we go into color and white balance, definitely not more yellow. There's plenty of that, and it wants to bring some pink. So I would leave it the way it is. Obviously, looking at your images for quite a while now, I wonder if the landscape really look like this, if these are really the colors you get there, because it's kind of very specific white balance I always see on your images. So it's quite interesting. Other than that, I think it all kind of works together. Again, you could kind of close the image a little bit further by using maybe a linear gradient and putting it, not linear, by using linear and pushing it here, and maybe bringing the exposure down a little bit to bring more attention in the center of the image, which you could highlight with a radial gradient and with a little bit of extra exposure, something like this. So that's about it. Now, talking about this one, definitely I would be looking at the white balance here. Let's see if auto helps. It helps, but I don't think that cool, but I think a little bit cooler would help. Now you see when it's on a 0, you see how much green is in his feathers and everything. And when we push the pink, we actually managed to remove some of that. So I'm quite happy with that. Now we could also add some texture by using a brush and plus texture, and see if we can actually brush over the bird and add some details specifically into him rather than the rest of the image and sharpening everything else. So I think that works quite nicely as well. That adds nice feel to the bird. And that's it. I would leave it from there. I think it's nicely done, Zdenek. So the bird picture is lovely. Just the pixelation is a little bit of a shame. The landscape is quite epic. I really like that, with the foreground, with the sky, with the lake. Well done. Zdenek, thank you again for sharing your images with us. It's always a pleasure. Stay safe and send us more for the next episode. Which brings us to Ken. Ken is our main birdman here at Clever Photographer. And we have 2 images here. Now this one I love. That's brilliant. Color contrast, details, sharpness, excellent. This one, obviously very interesting capture. However, the light wasn't the greatest here. You get lots of shadows. The highlights on the top as well are a little bit burned out. So let's have a look at them. Talking about this one first. So can actually shoot with Nikon Coolpix P1000, which again is another person, or third person today actually. The settings on the camera: ISO 100, 467 millimeters on zoom, so really zoomed in all the way. f7.1, giving you this nice softness at the back, and 1/500 of a second, making sure everything is nice and sharp. Now, when it comes to sharpness, I love this one. I think that's really well done. ISO 100 is also a good choice, even though you still get a little bit of noise at the background. I wonder why. I wonder where it's coming from. The rest of the setting is perfectly fine. I like the fact that you chose your f-stop, so there is a little bit of details at the back. And coming to obviously composition, we talk about that in a second. The contrast between the green and gray works really well here. That brings us to this image. Now, this is same camera, ISO 200, 216 millimeter, f5.6, 1/80th second, making sure that it's all sharp. So the sharpness is good. However, it's the light really that just make it very unfortunate. It's a great capture. I'm sure it was very exciting to capture it, but there's just lots of darker areas here. The camera settings are quite spot on. There's nothing wrong there. There is no extra noise, but it's just those shadows. Which brings us to composition. Composition wise, I mean, he's facing down, so the extra space works very nice. And actually, there is not much I can add to it. He's in the center. He's the main subject. I think it works all together. Now, there is lots of details at the back of the animal, so I think if there would be more soft, it would add to the depth and again bring more attention to the bird. But all in all, very well done. Which brings us to this animal. This bird, as a composition goes, is really nicely done. When we look at the thirds, I think that's nicely positioned. The animal actually just following your line. Enough space in front of him. And again, the depth and the color contrast is really what make this picture work very, very well. When it comes to post-processing, we can look at the white balance. Again, just adding a little bit of temperature, maybe in a minus to make it a little bit cooler, I think works very well. And I think extra tint on a magenta, again, takes a little bit of green and makes the color of the bird a little bit more natural. Other than that, yes, we could do a little bit of vignetting here to add a little bit of that, but other than that, it's a beautiful picture, and this would be definitely worth to print and put it on your wall, Ken. I think it would be lovely. On this one, there's not much we can do in the post-processing because there is not necessarily anything wrong, and the light you can't really fix here. So we could go in the light and maybe open the shadows a little bit more so we can see more of the details. We could see with the highlights, no darker, but something like this, and then with the whites to see one way or the other, not sure, maybe something like this. Ken, pleasure as always. Thank you very much for sending us your photos. Make sure you send them again next week. Which brings us to Lieve. Lieve. This one I love. When I saw this picture, I had to laugh so much. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And this one is beautiful too. Lovely contrast. The red with the background works very, very well here. Very impressed by that. So Lieve, let's have a look at it. Jumping in the camera settings, starting with this picture. Nikon D780, the lens 100 to 400 millimeters, and from your camera settings, ISO 100, spot on, 400 millimeters, f6.3, giving you still a little bit of elements and details at the back, which I quite like, and 1/800th of a second, 80th of a second, and still getting the sharpness on the bird. That's very impressive. Well done, Lieve. Really, really like that. Nicely composed. Very well done. Moving into this one. Is it the same camera? Same camera, same lens. From the camera setting, ISO 100, great. 400 millimeters, great. f6.3, lovely. 1/100 of a second, very good. Now the sharpness on the animal itself, it just moved just a little bit. You can see it, it's a little bit visible. And I wonder if you could run it through something like a Topaz Sharpen AI, which I think would actually help to fix this quite easily. However, what I really like here is the softness at the back and the front. I think that works really nicely with just a little bit of details here around the animal. I think that's brilliant. So really, Lieve, just lovely capture. Both of them technically very well done. Just touch on a sharpness here, otherwise superb. Composition wise, again, great. The contrast works very nicely. The darker background actually helps to bring the animal up. The softness in front helps to bring the attention towards it. The fact that the animal is all there, it's facing you, there is a little bit of the details in the grass, just very well done. On this one, similarly to the first photo, just very well done. Great color contrast here, great amount of details, well composed, lovely light as well, so it's nice and soft, there is no heavy shadows, just beautiful Lieve. You should be happy about both of them. Which brings us to post-processing, and to be honest, they are both so lovely and natural that I wouldn't do much to it. Definitely not this one. If anything, I would maybe just push the contrast a little bit more. And since the bird is so beautiful, I would add a little bit of extra saturation. So just something like this. You can see the before and after. Now on this one, maybe similarly, just add a little bit of extra contrast. What we could do, we could go into curve, make one point in, and then see if we can maybe make the background even darker, and the animal itself, maybe something like this. Again, before and after. And that's about it. Lieve, thank you so much for sharing your photos with us. It was a pleasure to see them. One of the best work I saw from you, so thank you. And it was a pleasure as always. That brings us to the last photographer for the week. We have Vanessa. Vanessa, we have two images, almost like from Ratatouille. Now, I'm terrible at animals, so I don't know if it's a mouse or a rat, but it's extremely cute. And especially this one from the back, I think it's really nicely done. Now, Vanessa, I tell you what's the one shame for both of these images, and that's the size of the images. It's really a bit tricky to judge the technical details as they are kind of soft when I zoom in, but we can still have a look at it. Anyway, there's no camera details neither for neither of the pictures. So again, another thing which would be great to get. So higher resolution, so higher size of the images, and camera details would really be helpful for this case. Looking at this image, so there is quite nice level of details on it, nice details on the fur. Of course, this is all about the subject and composition, so I'm not judging that the technical part too much. The softness at the back is nice. However, I also like that you can recognize the flowers. I think it makes it even more romantic and kind of adventurous, so that's nicely done. The contrast here works very well also with the color of the animal, so I think that's nicely done. Now on this one, it's also lovely. I like the soft background. I think that again helps with the contrast. The sharpness is nice. The level of the details on the mustache was work very well. The fur as well, just nicely done. Yeah. So technically, I don't see any problems. The light is quite nicely here. What I would more think of would be maybe seeing how I can help if I can see the camera details for next time, and also when I can see bigger files. For the composition, now on this one, I just wish there was a little bit more space here to make it a little bit more balanced. I would zoom just a little bit more out to give a little bit more space around. Other than that, the subject is clear, the contrast is nice. What next thing I would do, I would maybe position the camera a little bit more down to get equal space on each side of the animal. That could also help, and leave it from there. And on this one, I think it's brilliant. If anything, I would maybe try to go a little bit more off, because once you don't have the animal center, then might as well just push it a little bit more towards the side. The contrast is beautiful here. again, the color, the light is a little bit harsh, but the level of details in the ears and the flower just makes it all nice. The depth is nice here. I think the space around is nice. So very well done. Post-processing, definitely getting some green hue in the animal itself. So I would go into the color and push a little bit the tint to bring some of the natural color back. So this is your before and after. We could also add a little bit of extra contrast just to make it all pop out a little bit more and leave it from there. On this one, definitely you're getting lots of yellows in his fur again, or hair. So going into the color and seeing if a little bit of blue and maybe a little bit of pink wouldn't make it more natural, and it does. You see how it kind of removes all of it. So I think that works quite nicely. We can just drop it a little bit more and make it more balanced to do something like this. And then I think maybe even the overall exposure would help. I just wish that we could make a little bit brighter. I think that would help. And a little glow to add even more to that composition, I think would be helpful too. So Vanessa, 2 beautiful pictures. Thank you very much for sharing them with us. It was a pleasure to review them for you. And I hope to see more pictures of you in a near, not of you, your pictures in a near future. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us for the next episode of Photographe Review Show, all you need to do is to head to our website, cleverphotography.com, and search for the membership there. The Clever Photographer Plus is a great membership where every month you get new theme bundle full of textures, overlays, LUTs, presets, brushes, and everything you can imagine. Together with additional bonuses, you get access to our Clever Photographer Academy, as well as access to this Photographe Review Show. So make sure you check it out. Thank you very much for watching today. Stay safe, and until next time, bye bye.